Hello, welcome. I'm Jim Herries. I'm a geographer working at Esri in Redlands, California. We're all swimming around in an ocean of data, it seems like. I know I am. Data everywhere, but who has time to analyze it and study it and share maps and apps that bring that data to life? Well, we do. Each of the panelists today are part of a team called ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World. I'm a geographer and a product engineer on the Living Atlas team, and I'm joined by two others today.
Hi, I'm Lisa Berry, and I am a senior product engineer for the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World team. My focus is mainly on demographics, and so I'll be helping you learn how to make a human impact map today using demographic data along with climate information.
And hello, I'm Keith VanGraafeiland. I'm also a product engineer on the Living Atlas of the World team, and I focus on ocean-related content and helping the community bring their ocean-related content to fruition within our platform, and then try to understand the user's needs of how they might use ocean-related data.
Thanks. Now listen, we're among hundreds of people at Esri who work hard every day to deliver the best maps that we can to millions of users. We source our data from official sources, federal, local, state, also businesses. And in many cases, we partner with these data sources, the people behind these data sets. We partner with them to innovate and to deliver useful and attractive maps and related information. We are, in fact, a lot like you journalists, and here's why. In order to do our job in publishing these maps, we need to understand how the data reflects what is going on in the world, whether it's climate change or the environment, data about people, or data about the infrastructure that people build that connects all of these things. And when we find an interesting angle, we publish it. And that's the biggest difference between data, raw data, and what you find in Living Atlas. We are among the people who do the hard work of bringing data to life and sharing it with the world. But generally, we stop short of reporting the significance of each topic to each community in a nationwide map or a global map. We'll publish the map of air quality across the entire country, and we'll do it in a responsible and understandable way, but we don't rank the cities or countries in terms of what they are experiencing, or we don't emphasize how California air quality has changed over the recent decades. The data and the information is there to be had, the story is present, and that's where you come in. Now, we're gonna show you some things today that utilize all this Living Atlas content you've seen on these slides. That's kind of our product story of this content of Living Atlas, but what we wanna focus on is more about how you, as journalists, can consume or use Living Atlas in your work. And what you need to know is that Living Atlas contains ready-to-use apps, dashboards, maps, and layers. And there's three patterns we're gonna kind of show today. I'm gonna quickly go through the three patterns, but then you're gonna have more in-depth time with Keith and with Lisa. So the first pattern is called consume. Can you take some ready-to-use applications that we've already built and provisioned and provided online in Living Atlas? Can you take those apps and use them in your articles to let your readers explore a topic and get the facts on their own? And the other approach is to configure. We have a lot of applications that, they might be global in content, or they might look at the entire United States, but you want to study your state, you want to study your community, your city even. So how do you configure those things in an easy fashion so that you leverage the hard work that's already gone into this global or national application, and you focus it in on just the community that you're interested in, start to get facts from that. And lastly, there's create. Like all of our GIS users, when you're part of our system, you can create your own new maps and information products quickly to bring new perspectives. You can change the map symbology and run analysis and things like that. So I'm gonna switch what I'm sharing. So bear with me while I go hit the right button. And we'll see if we can do it in record time. I think that's the fastest I've ever done this. Okay, great. So this is what Living Atlas looks like. It's livingatlas.arcgis.com. And when you go there, we've got some stories about what's new in our collections. things you can look over. The thing I mentioned first are applications. We have a lot of applications that get highlighted in articles that journalists write. And you can browse through these. You can touch one of them to take a look at it. And what a lot of journalists are doing is writing articles all about the topic. So whether it's coastal flooding potential or tying into any real-time information about hurricanes. I checked just before this call, we don't have any active hurricanes, so we can close that one. But California wildfires, this is an example of someone who's made a nice GIF animation or GIF animation, whichever you prefer, of the smoke coming off a collection of fires at this particular time. And what this looks like, each of these applications available on, again, under the Apps tab. You can go to the Apps tab and just kind of click on one of them. And when you do so, it tells you all about it. You could even, in many cases, download the source code and put this on your own website if you're that ambitious. But it's just as easy for you to just embed this application into your stories. And what we try to do on Living Atlas team is bring the data to life. We always want to not just show a map, but also tell you a little bit more about what's going on in an area. So usually you can, almost every time, you can click on the map and get additional information about that particular part of the country. In this case, I love this example, this air quality app, because it combines infrastructure, all the air quality monitoring stations. It combines that with the environment, the air quality measurements itself, and the people. It tells you something about the demographics of the region that I just clicked on, and something about, you know, how many workers are at risk to air quality issues. And we try to do that similar with things like the water balance app. Or this is one of Keith's favorite maps and apps, the US vessel traffic, where you can take a peek at different types of movements of ships around this area. We've got a historical topo map explorer, where you can look at all the different topo maps available for a given area of the US. Or if you want to explore sea ice, there's an app for that. Again, with a map, interactive components that let you kind of explore the data and find a story. With wildfires, we have this app available 24/7, 365 to track all the active fires. It's always surprising to me that there are fires in Georgia and Florida. I never knew that till I saw apps like this. And some other interesting things, Ecological Marine Unit Explorer. As I said, we have a Hurricane Aware app, and I'm grateful to report there are no hurricanes on the map right now. We have a Drought Explorer, where when you click on a county, it shows you a 20-year history of drought in this area. So at a glance, you can see this dark brown color tells us in 2021, this particular county in New Mexico is in the worst long-term sequence of drought that it has ever experienced in the past 20 years. There's your story, there's your angle. And other things like tracking the COVID pandemic at a state and a county level. This COVID Pulse application kind of gives you strong visuals of where things have calmed down or where things are still an issue. And a similar approach with unemployment, again, at the county and the state level. Lisa's going to show you some detail about an example where these maps are more than pretty pictures. They have data behind them. And that's something we really enjoy with the Living Atlas. So this is an example. Up till now, I've been showing you all examples where you can take an app and consume it by just doing some research using that app, writing a story, maybe even embed that application or at least a screenshot of it into your story. The next pattern is configure. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, Lisa created an amazing dashboard. And recently we found out one of our customers made a copy of her dashboard and focused it in just on Florida because that's what that person was interested in. We call that the configure use pattern, where you leverage work already done by Lisa, in this case, on the Living Atlas team, and you just refocus it to show just the county you want. You can see up here in the right-hand corner, all the states are available, but they pre-wired this to focus on Florida. And she'll go into more detail on that. And the last pattern is create. all of the Living Atlas applications and dashboards are powered by maps. And you have an opportunity to actually access the source map. This is the source map for Lisa's dashboard and the same source map for that Florida dashboard. But if you wanted to change this, you could go in and change things about this map, maybe change the colors or change the information that responds when you click on the map to suit your particular interest. So you do have the full freedom of all of our GIS users whenever you want it. So hopefully you're beginning to see how Living Atlas content is very different from a static printed atlas. And there's actual data behind each Living Atlas map. So you can actually ask questions of a Living Atlas map. You can filter the map to show only your city, county, or state, as was done here. Yeah, right there. You can enhance the maps with Photoshop-like blend effects. You can run analysis on the map to ask questions like how many people live within 5 miles of this thing and have an answer in seconds. And you can even configure your own app or dashboard to let your readers explore data on their own. So those are the 3 big patterns we wanted to get across. Consume apps that provide focused experiences on the data and topic. Configure ready-to-use maps that put your community in a particular context, and you investigate that map yourself and start to draw out story points. And thirdly, create your own new maps from the source layers, the same layers we all use. That's what we enjoy about our work, is we know our work can be repurposed for others and by others to fit their needs. So that's enough from me, I think. Let's go to the experts. Let's go to Keith. I think we're going to Keith first.
Yeah, Jim, that sounds good. I'm happy to share some of the work that I've been involved with in supporting our community today. I want to talk about flooding, particularly within the United States. Sea level rise is happening. And what we're looking at here is a dashboard that shows 6 different scenarios of sea level rise. And there's a time slider at the bottom. And this allows you to step through time and understand each of these different scenarios that range from low to high to extreme of how many flood days at each one of these coastal communities throughout the United States are expected to occur within a single calendar year. Why is this important? This is important because as coastal community planners or engineers, we might need to start to plan infrastructure to be able to support this, whether it's maybe putting in a pump station to help alleviate some of the water that might be around during these events, if they're happening more often. So if we look at low, it says 0.3 meters. This is how much flooding within the low scenario they expect to happen over a 100-year period, 0.3 meters. In the extreme map on the bottom right, they're saying 2.5 meters over a 100-year period of time. So that's roughly 2.5 millimeters per year is how you would account for that. And you take the current sea level and you add these heights on top of it on an annual basis, and you understand what locations within the United as would be flooded as a result of that. So these are predictions that are actually provided by NOAA. And at each one of these locations throughout the United States, you can click on a particular place and understand exactly what's going to happen. So within each of these different scenarios, within the calendar year of 2021 at Windmill Point, Virginia, we can see that there are 8 flooding days expected to occur and 45 extreme, and then varying degrees in between there. This flooding is going to happen regardless of storm events. This is flooding that's happening based upon the high tide cycle and the lunar cycle, or the moon. So, think of when there's a full moon or when there's a new moon, we have higher than high normal tides. And then when those coincide with a high tide cycle, that's when these type of flooding events occur. These are also called sunny day flooding. So you might see streets flooding in these areas when you don't have any precipitation, it's not cloudy, it's sunny out, and it is a phenomenon, and it's a phenomena that's expected to increase as sea level rise increases. So this is important for us to cope with as communities, and then to understand these increases over time. So at this same location, taking a look at the intermediate scenario, walking forward in time to the year 2031, so just 10 years from now, we can see that middle of the road intermediate scenario goes up to 38 days of flooding that they expect here. That's vastly different than the number that we saw in this current year. So these are things that we need to start to plan for. There are locations that have a higher percentage of increase expected over the next 10 years than others. And that's probably what we want to focus on in the near time, but as we work our way forward into the oncoming decades here, a lot of these places are faced with very similar type of flooding that exponentially just grows over time. So this app is intended to help understand and communicate that message to the public, and to hopefully put a focal lens on maybe the communities that are expecting to have a significant increase in the interim period, and might need resources, might need funding in order to help alleviate the stress on that coastal community there. So this is just an example of this app in particular. This layer that powers this application is found in the Living Atlas of the World. So as Jim mentioned, we have maps and resources that are available that you can configure on your own side. And I'm going to show a little bit about creating some derivative products from this following what Lisa shows. And it's just a very beneficial information product that has been worked up and is really ready or ripe for increasing understanding about this phenomena. As we all know, sea level rise is continuing to worsen. So with that, I'll pass it over to Lisa, and thank you.
Awesome. Great example. I think that's a really good segue into what I'm going to be showing, because that really shows how you can consume ready-to-use applications from Living Atlas. And so I'm going to start talking about how you can configure your own maps out of content like this. So for example, the Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, also known as CDAC, is a part of NASA, and they create these detailed data sets that are gridded values of PM2.5 ground level fine particulate matter. Why does this matter when it comes to climate and population? Well, when people breathe in PM2.5, it can really impact their lungs and their health. But where does PM2.5 come from? It comes from us. So on its own, PM2.5 is an important story about how humans impact the world around us and the environment and the climate, but it also impacts us the other direction. So within the Living Atlas, there's actually a wide range of layers and maps that are ready to be used that use this data, but instead of giving it to you in a gridded format, it's actually already been aggregated and analyzed into really easy to understand geographies, such as countries, administrative one, so think of that as like a state, and even down to 50-kilometer hex bins. Now, these maps can easily be used directly within your stories and your journals, your reports that tell really interesting stories, such as how many people have died from air pollution causes, or what is the population weighted air quality in this area. And while these can be easily used, I'm going to show you how you can transform one of these into a whole different story. So for example, if we bring that raw data into a map, immediately we can see that this map is showing us a 19-year pattern of this PM2.5 data, and it's centered on an important value. So anything in red on this map is not meeting the World Health Organization guideline of 10 micrograms per cubic meter. That's a fancy way of saying the air pollution is not good, or the air pollution is bad. The air quality is not good. So we can immediately see some interesting patterns in this map. And while you can just use this map as it is, I'm going to show you how you can customize this. So right now we're seeing that 19-year average, but I want to go ahead and change what is being shown. Instead, I want to focus on one particular year of data. So I actually am going to look at 2016, which is the most recent value of this PM2.5 data. Automatically, ArcGIS Online is going to give me a suggestion. It says, oh, these are numerical values. And so it gives it to me by size. But I want to keep on that pattern of showing with color instead. Right away, the map is giving us something interesting. It's showing us kind of a similar pattern to what we saw before of areas with poor air quality. But really, we can unlock stories in this data by going into the options and exploring the data itself. So we can see it was centered on 7.9 simply because that's the average of the data for this year. So this is interesting. But with a quick Google search, we can again confirm that World Health Organization value of an annual mean of 10 micrograms per cubic meter as something that is important. This is an important threshold that we can be using in our map. So an easy way to highlight a threshold such as this, we can use a diverging color ramp, or in ArcGIS Online, this is simply called the above and below theme. What we can do is we can just drag this up to that important value or even type it in. And now our map is centered on something more important. So we're already telling a more interesting story. But goodness gracious, these colors are not working for the topic that we're showing. So instead, we can easily transform this map into something more related to the topic. So I might think of dirty air as brown. So this might be a good color ramp. Or if I want to highlight it as danger, I might use something like red. So now that we've centered our map on something important and useful, how do we add a population perspective? How can we now visualize the population impact when it comes to air quality? We can simply add another field. We can even search for it. If I look for population, I actually have that 2016 data in here already, thanks to the Living Atlas already providing it for me. And now automatically, I'm going to see an interesting pattern. I'm going to be able to visualize where there is a high amount of population alongside that pattern of air quality. And now while this map is already telling me something interesting, again, going into the options is where the key stories will come out of our data. Let's explore these size options since we already looked at color. We can automatically see this data is skewed, meaning a lot of it is low down, and we have an outlier up here, a statistical outlier driving the map on this data. I can see that's China and India. So what we can do is we can just drag this down and immediately start to see other countries emerging so that we can automatically see, okay, the United States and Brazil both have a high amount of population, but their air quality is overall better. So the impact is going to be different than it is in these areas with poor air quality and lots of population. We can even make small adjustments to the size themselves to really emphasize this story on our map so that now we're seeing these areas of concern pop in the map that we created. Now that's one view of population impact when it comes to mapping a climate attribute, but there's also other things within the Living Atlas that can help us tell these stories. So for example, here's that same layer that we saw before of PM2.5. And here's a layer from the Living Atlas showing us where people actually live in the world. So how can we align these two different things? I've overlaid it. This isn't a very useful map because now I can't see that pattern of PM2.5. Well, luckily in ArcGIS Online, we now have blending modes, which Jim mentioned earlier. And these are a really valuable way to unlock patterns that may not have been visible otherwise. Since I have this on top of my other layer, I can use the destination atop blending mode. And now we have quickly transformed this layer into something really interesting where we now can see not only where the PM 2.5 exists, but where that is in relation to where population actually lives. So now that we've configured this map to what we want it to be, now we can start to create things out of it. For example, I can take this map that we just made and I can put it within an application. So we've already made our map. We can actually use the Create App option directly within ArcGIS Online Map Viewer to create an instant app of our choice. Oh, I have to be signed in, of course. That helps. But once we have saved our map and configured it to how we want, these instant apps give us a really easy way to embed just the map within our stories. And so one of the ones that is commonly used by reporters is this media map, which you can create to simply focus on the map itself. This is what this will look like when it is embedded within your application. Notice how simple this is. People can interact with the map and they can share it out in different ways. And then here's where you find that embed option. So with just a few clicks, you can configure and also create. But there's a lot of different ways that we can create from a map once we've configured what we want. Another example is a dashboard. You've heard of this a few times. In this case, all I did was bring in that map we just made and add what's called an indicator. And now notice how this is actually going to adjust as we move around the map. Again, we're getting a population perspective by using this indicator, and all it's doing is pointing to that population field from that layer from Living Atlas. And it's not only visually showing us this pattern, but it's also giving us some valuable statistics where, like Jim said, people can explore as they look through this data. We can also use what's called a story map to tell these interesting stories about our data. This one in particular is saying, how does air pollution relate to policy? So again, we've focused on that World Health Organization threshold that we mentioned earlier by introducing the map here. But then we actually start to go into policies themselves, such as the 1979 RLTAP. I'm not even going to say the full name for the sake of time. But essentially, these countries agreed to make a change when it comes to PM 2.5. But did their promise actually stick? Well, using one of the maps that was already in the Living Atlas for us, we're actually able to immediately tell an interesting story of where this agreement is working. Areas in blue saw an improvement. If we go back here, we can see that pretty closely aligns to who made a promise. And so a story map can help us tell these narratives about how population and agreements have actually been in place. There's lots of other options, such as gallery views, where if we want to give a collection of maps, we can put these in place so that people can explore the topics they might be interested in. The map easily just opens, and like Jim said, people can just interact with it and learn more about the data if they're interested. But this gives people the availability to just explore. And now this was a global narrative. If you're working with just data in America, the United States, I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about some more Living Atlas content that you can use to evolve the stories you're telling when it comes to population impact, like I've been saying. American Community Survey is a part of the US Census Bureau, and this covers a wide range of demographics, and it goes down to tract level, so counties, states, and tract level, so detailed information about the population. And you'll notice as you can kind of browse your eyes through these, there's so many different topics that you can bring in information about when mapping your data. Now, these are all layers that you can use, but you can also look up a specific topic like digital divide. And so these are narrowed down to maps that are ready to use within our applications. And here, we don't even have to necessarily configure a map. It might already be made for us directly within the Living Atlas. And so if we explore that dashboard that Jim showed us earlier, what this is doing is using a ready-to-use map from Living Atlas along with those ACS layers, and it's giving us these detailed indicators that tell us more about each state within the country. So if I focus this down to Arizona, the map will automatically tell me more in-depth information. And now this was also available in Living Atlas, this dashboard. We actually had Manatee County in Florida take that dashboard and create their own version from it. And they said, well, we want to be able to explore the counties within our state. And so they took our county, or they took our dashboard, customized it, and made it focus on the story that they wanted to tell, but it just uses all that same Living Atlas data. And we'll share this out as well, but we also have a blog on if you're interested in knowing how to do this yourself. So we have a lot of resources that are available to you to do this. And now I've kind of told some stories about configure and create, but I'm going to actually hand it back to Keith, who's going to continue on with this story about that configure and create, since we've already talked about consume quite a bit.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, and configuring and creating is really important. I think particularly for those of us that might be in the writing field, trying to communicate with our audience. One of the things that I think is important within some of these applications is the ability to share exactly what you might have been looking at on the screen within some of these particular apps to get your audience looking at maybe exactly what you were looking at. So in this case, within this application here, there might be a particular community that is experiencing more flooding during a particular lunar phase than another. And you have the ability to copy the location to your clipboard, and that will actually bring you right back to this same location. If I were to paste that and run that in a web browser, it'll bring me right back to that location, the year in particular that I was looking at, and the exact view that I had. So as far as communicating some of the things from these applications back to your readership, this is a nice utility to be able to do that. Also, these layers power these dashboards. So in different applications that we have available, but you can bring these layers into your own maps and configure them, as Lisa mentioned, but also do your own creation of maybe some derivative products or mashups, as we like to call them in the GIS world, of maybe two layers combined together that help describe a phenomena. And I'm going to try to explain some of that right now by not only talking about the high tide flooding projection scenarios, but also integrating another layer from the Living Atlas of the World, which is our social vulnerability index. So this comes from our community. This comes from CDC. It's a layer that's been nominated by a public agency to the Living Atlas of the World and is made available to GIS users to benefit from, and they continue to curate or update this information and curate it to make it available, and that's a real key benefit of the Living Atlas of the World. So within this map, I have a few different layers that have been added. So I have the high tide flooding projection scenarios. And in this case, I'm still focused on that intermediate scenario. And I can scrub through time and look at the different locations with my legend here and understand as we make our way through time visually what locations are most vulnerable. Immediately, Grand Isle, Louisiana pops out to me, and New Orleans. Now, these are places that are already prone to flooding. And just pausing this, we have a pop-up that is configured on these layers that tell us, so how many, Grand Isle, Louisiana is predicted to have 315 flood days in the year 2049 based upon the high tide flooding probability scenario intermediate. That's a lot of flooding days. That's flooding, more often than not. That's flooding more than 3/4 of the year. So these communities might need to be able to prepare for that. And that's where I think that the social vulnerability information that is out there and made available by the CDC is really beneficial. So social vulnerability helps describe a community's preparedness of how they would respond to a natural disaster type of event, whether it's a man-made natural disaster or it's a disaster that is caused by a hurricane or earthquake. Sea level rise is kind of a natural disaster, and although it's not nearly as acute in temporal space or the time frame as some of the other ones, are these communities doing what they need to do to respond to it appropriately, even if it's going to be a 10-year process? And I think social vulnerability helps give us an idea of what areas can be most responsive to this. So in this case, I was interested in looking at the locations, those coastal communities that were most susceptible to flooding over the next 10 years. So which locations have the highest percentage of increase in the number of flood days between 2020 and 2030, and which of those locations have the highest social vulnerability. So in terms of social vulnerability, the lower your score, so here at the bottom, the yellows are good as far as social vulnerability goes, and the blues are bad. So that's your ability to respond to this. So the higher your social vulnerability, the worse off it is kind of how I associate it in my mind. And what I've gone ahead and done here is taken both of those layers, and I've created a relationship map that shows the percent change between 2020 and 2030 of the number of flooding days. So that's what is going up in the pink and magenta colors along the left-hand side of this relationship plot. And then what's going from left to right is the blues. So it's low to low as low to high, and that is the overall percentile ranking of the social vulnerability index. So here, I'm immediately drawn to the areas that would be in the top right-hand side, the highest of the high values of both percent change and the percentile ranking, as maybe areas that would be most socially vulnerable to coastal flooding within the next 10 years. And Miami is one of these locations that sticks out immediately. And when I click on this information, and we have a nice informative pop-up. So it gives us that 0.82 is a social vulnerability index score. It tells us that 0 is the lowest vulnerability and 1 is the highest vulnerability. And this indicates a high vulnerability. And it also tells me about the flooding scenario. So the percent change from 2020 to 2030 is 350%. That's significant. So they go from 2 to 9. So that helps explain that, okay, it's 350%, but it's not like going from 10 to 75. This is 2 to 9, so it's an extra 7 days a year that 350% comes from. Let's look over here at this location of Rockport, Texas. They have a slightly lower score, social vulnerability score than that of Miami at an 8.0, but they're going from 6 days of flooding to 25. And it's 316%. So they're going to have more flooding days actually than what we saw in Miami overall, but from their daily normal of how it's flooding there within the current calendar year, it's not exponentially increasing as much of that of Miami. So the relationship map is a really beneficial tool to be able to see these things, to draw you to the people, the social aspects of these phenomena that are occurring. And often we leave the people out of the scenario. And I think, understanding who's most impacted by coastal flooding can be achieved by this social vulnerability index, combined together with the coastal flooding information, and we can gain a better understanding of how that's happening. And then just to further, Lisa touched on story maps. Taking this information and embedding it into a story map is really the next step. Is how can I communicate what I just tried to describe to you all to a broader audience? And you have the ability to embed these flooding locations. So these are the same points that we were just looking at as far as those coastal communities that are expecting flooding over the next 100 years. And here we look at the different locations and the percentage increase and the number of difference in days at some of these different locations, different ranks, and just you know, some graphical visualizations of what that looks like over the next 10 years. So a story map is a really nice way to take this and make it available in a nice web shareable link. You can embed nice rich content like videos and things like that as well. So with that, I hope I've covered how you can create maybe some derivative layers or derivative products from, you know, literally two layers from the Living Atlas mashed up together to understand coastal flooding and social vulnerability and the relationship between both of those. So with that, I pass it back to Jim, I believe, and I thank you again.
Keith, that's fantastic. I love seeing this stuff. Maybe those of you watching can maybe see why we love our jobs on the Living Atlas team, yeah, at Esri in general. I mean, nature provides the impetus for a story, whether it's a hurricane, fire, climate change effect. And Living Atlas maps help you see how existing infrastructure or planned infrastructure and people are affected or involved. It's this endless source of stories. So think about all the people, think maybe how we do about it. We think about all the people who work so hard to create good data, and we get to join them in taking that data and bringing it to life in the manner, just a few examples we've shown here today. So every single map, your takeaway perhaps is that every single map can launch dozens of stories, even if it's just as simple as focusing in on one particular community. But who tells those stories, right? Each item in the Living Atlas does tell a story about the data it portrays, but it may not tell all the stories. So whether you need just a quick fact check, or you want to get an image of current wildfires off of our map and put it in your article, maybe even you want your article to embed or consume a live map of current wildfires, Living Atlas is ready for you. And everything in Living Atlas, as Keith and Lisa showed, can be configured to focus on a particular community. And when you want to go deeper into a story, the create option is always there for you. That's one of the more interesting things to do, is to start putting layers on top of each other. That's really one of the fundamental things that geographers, GIS people, anyone who thinks spatially, they're always looking for those spatial connections. So in conclusion, if you're a reporter, or you know one, and you'd like to start using ArcGIS Living Atlas content for your research, your articles, your fact checking, etc., just email our media team. You've got the email address on screen. It's media.help@esri.com, and you'll get a response and access to the system. So thank you for watching, and please get in touch with us. Let us know your thoughts.